Leaders like you pave the way for a brighter future, one future that we can really experience diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And as this future starts now, I'm honored to introduce you to our next session, Building Belonging in the Global Workplace, powered by athenahealth. And let's say in an increasingly pluralized world, how do you build harmony and belonging for all employees? So tune in to this brilliant session of chief diversity officers from different industries that hear their insights on how they are driving in a culture of trust and inclusion in their organizations. What is their role? And in it, how they are influencing and helping from a global or a local culture of belonging at the workplace. So let's give a warm welcome to Margot Slattery, Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Sodexo, Dr. Allyson Livingstone, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at athenahealth, Erin Uritus, CEO of 𝘊𝘪𝘳𝘠𝘭, 𝘊𝘪𝘃𝑃𝑃𝑢𝑟, Chief Diversity Officer at 𝘋𝑳𝘃. 𝘊𝘪 unfortunately won't be able to join us for this session, but thank you to athenahealth for powering this important plenary.
It doesn't matter what demographic you're from. It doesn't matter where you live in the country. The reality is that healthcare and the crisis that we're in the healthcare industry impacts everybody.
The healthcare industry and landscape is constantly changing. If we don't attack it from a team perspective, we are doomed to fail.
When I was able to marry both healthcare and technology together in my career path, it was incredibly fulfilling because it was sort of that culmination of wanting to do good, but then also wanting to work on a bigger scale.
As a product manager, I think a smart solution is one that's technologically superior and at the same time user-focused.
Healthcare is full of all sorts of challenges, so boredom is not one thing that you deal with.
I want to be part of that company that really makes that change in healthcare, not only for the providers that we serve, but the patients that they serve as well.
3, 2, 1, go.
Athenistas are passionate people. It doesn't matter if you have a healthcare background. Athena is looking for problem solvers, entrepreneurs, anybody with a passion to work.
What I like about Athena is, at its roots, at its core, at every fiber of its DNA, it is mission-driven.
Hi, everyone. I am Erin Uritus, the CEO of 𝘊𝘃𝑃𝑢𝑟 Workplace Advocates. For 25 years, we have been working hand in hand with Fortune 1000 companies, government agencies, and community nonprofits and partners to not just encourage and support LGBTQ+ people in coming out, but to create workplaces where all people feel like they can belong and thrive. Before I begin today, I want to pause and acknowledge the crisis happening in India right now, stemming from COVID-19 health pandemic. It is hard to imagine that we would dive into news about progress, policies, best practices, and other data without first centering ourselves in the reality of how difficult this year has been and continues to be. With the numbers climbing in so many countries and uncertainties around vaccine rollout, we are meeting together today to talk about important work that must continue, but also in the eye of the storm of uncertainty. The 𝘊𝘃𝑃𝑢𝑟 team has experienced loss, friends and family, coworkers who have suffered and died because of COVID. So on behalf of the entire 𝘊𝘃𝑃𝑢𝑟 team, I want to tell you that if you feel alone, isolated, and worn down, we see you. If you or your family, friends, or colleagues have suffered or died from COVID, we see you and we mourn with you. if you have anxiety about how we will move forward on this important work of equality while we are still in the throes of this disaster, just know that we see you, and more importantly, we are here to support you. We will all move forward together. I am so honored to be part of this important event in partnership with Pride Circle, our longtime partner in India. We've been in constant communication with each other, providing support, friendship, and solidarity through these trying times. We know that COVID has had a particularly significant impact on India, with high case numbers in hospitals running out of oxygen, and that many of our friends and family there are suffering. The LGBTQ community in particular, the trans community, has been disproportionately impacted. We are here for you now during this time, and we commit to continuing to work and partner in even more meaningful ways with Pride Circle and the rest of our partners in India, organizing forums, roundtables, and producing useful workplace inclusion resources. In the last 3 years in particular, 𝑘𝑪 has witnessed companies strengthening their public voice and advocacy work as they fully embrace and fight for the values of inclusion, even beyond because of the business case. 𝑘𝑪 has invested in supporting companies like the ones you'll hear from today in doing the critical work of building optimal organizational culture, what we call cultures of belonging. We have more optimism than ever because of these trends, but we cannot rest there. We must and will keep supporting companies and doing the real difficult work to make this practice sustained, embedded and sustained for the long run. So let me just pause for a minute to read through some centering numbers, statistics, to remind us of how far we've come globally. 94% of Fortune 500 companies now offer gender identity protections explicitly in non-discrimination, compared to 3% only in 2002. 99% of Fortune 500 companies now offer sexual orientation protections explicitly in non-discrimination, compared to 2% in 2002. 71% of Fortune 500 now offer trans-inclusive benefits, compared to 0 in 2002. 97 new companies, Fortune 500 and beyond, started offering these benefits in just the past year alone. So conversations are becoming naturally more global in nature, and they should be. Companies are thinking more critically about the Think Global, Impact Local framework of implementing their inclusion efforts across the countries they work in. So for example, elevating leadership in each country to lead and dictate how initiatives should be translated and implemented in a certain country. In fact, the theme for 𝘊𝘬𝘗𝘗 this year is Together, Resisting, Supporting, Healing. This really paints a picture of our global reality today. We must work together to get our community through these times and work towards healing and a better future. Now let me tell you a couple other things beyond the numbers that we're really excited about. The theme for our Q1 global forums in March was trans and non-binary inclusion. And each forum began with inspirational stories from trans and non-binary leaders, then moved into interactive breakouts where participants workshopped scenarios, providing each other with really practical advice. The most recent Q1 India forum in March focused on trans and non-binary inclusion and was one of our most highly attended virtual events in India, which really goes to show the momentum and drive to advance this in this area. We took part of the event for peer-to-peer learning to break out into small groups and workshop strategies for navigating real life scenarios around everyday allyship for trans and non-binary folks. This process also doubled as a co-creation process for our upcoming resource, which we're really excited about, and utilize community source solutions and best practices to inform our guide. We also at 𝑘𝑪 produced an inclusive language guide in Portuguese, and one is forthcoming in Spanish. So neutral Spanish and Portuguese, taking binary gender out of the language. Also coming up is a trans and non-binary inclusion guide for India and China. We are really excited about going beyond the data and the business case for inclusion to high-level best practices, to really rolling up our sleeves, as I just mentioned, and working with local folks globally to actually outline practices, best practices, helpful guides that really make this implementable and gives people confidence to implement this work. And we're really proud of that and hope you all are finding that useful. And I just want to also step back for a minute as a bridge to turning it over to my colleagues here, some really exciting company examples. We have major US airlines, for example, offering gender neutral booking options. So many airlines that you may know of, American, United, Delta, and more. JP Morgan changed their bylaws to use entirely gender neutral language, including job titles. 𝘍𝘁𝗻, which is a Brazilian food and beverage company, uses neutral Portuguese on their products. Walmart introduced pronoun pins and badges, and Lyft launched the Two is Few Too campaign by adding expansive pronoun options to their app. Other examples which are really exciting and get into structures are, for example, Baker McKenzie setting a 40-40-20 gender diversity target by 2025, but with the 20% defined as flexible to include non-binary people. Shanghai Disneyland adds an all-gender facilities to their park. Disney also recently changed their uniforms to be gender inclusive. Disney also is about to hire their first transgender voice actor for an upcoming animated film about a transgender girl. Braskem, a Brazilian petrochemical company, introduced BIT, who is a non-binary AI IT support avatar that can chat with employees on their intranet and answer tech questions for them. BIT is non-binary and uses gender-neutral pronouns, sparking educational opportunities for all of their Braskem employees. And finally, one other example is HackerEarth, an Indian software company, which you may know about, which added gender-expansive options to their self-ID selections and hosts international educational trainings. And these are just a few of what we observe to be going on. There is lots of good news here, and together we will accelerate the progress towards equality, but also ensure that solutions are tailored for and driven by local communities and brilliant activists and advocates like you so that they are sustainable. Out & Equal looks forward to continuing to be on this journey with you, into amplifying your learnings, your stories, and solutions for our entire global LGBTQ and allied community. Thank you so much for inviting me today and for allowing me to share the spotlight with some other amazing corporate leaders doing important and cutting-edge work in this space. Thank you.
So I'm so happy to be here. My name is Allyson Livingstone. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at athenahealth, at a cloud-based healthcare technology company that really seeks to expand healthcare access for all. So I'm so happy to be part of this conversation and thrilled to be engaging some of these questions with my colleagues. And so, you know, one of the things that we've been talking about is the ways that CDOs can foster that culture of belonging for all LGBT plus employees, right? Given the diversity within that group, right? With regard to cohort and experience and color and socioeconomic status and disability and title and all of those pieces. And so how do we also think about the different legal and societal aspects that groups are engaging? And so how do we manage them? Oh, it's complicated, to be sure. But the first step is really thinking about how do I identify where my knowledge gaps are with regard to understanding the experiences of LGBT plus employees across geo, across landscape, across social custom. So I ask a lot of questions. But ahead of that, I do some research on my own, right? What are some of the ongoing cultural nuances, legal changes and shifts that people are engaging? What about some current legislation? What about some current perhaps even pop culture, issues that are going on, right? What is the media sharing about gender and sexuality and all of these pieces, right? And then I start to ask a lot of questions from allies, from folks who are directly part of the community, to get a sense of the real impact of societal customs and legal landscapes on people's lives. So you ask questions, you're with people, you learn with people, and we have to be willing to standardize approach and be flexible as well. Another piece that I really want to underline is that even when the legal landscape shifts and when social customs begin to shift, it doesn't mean that a majority of folks are able to shift that quickly, right? So we might change the law, but that doesn't necessarily translate into workplaces or into systems of health or even healthcare or governance, right? We might change the laws, but people's hearts and minds might not be there yet. So what does it mean then for diversity directors and CDOs? What does that mean for these groups as we continue to support folks in the interim, right? Before the legal landscape matches folks' hearts and minds? Well, you keep on asking and engaging, and building out programs that are flexible to help move people along, to expand awareness so that we can start to really engage inclusively across identity, right? With a focus on LGBT plus people. So much of this work too is about, remember, engaging with people, meeting people where they are, and helping people move along and understand the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that necessitates having difficult conversations with people across the enterprise, right? Across cohort, in leadership, in more junior positions. And in doing this work, I'll just speak for myself, I assume that's part of the work. I assume I'll be having challenging conversations as I engage people's interest, passion, understanding around diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially as it relates to sexuality and gender. My job is to support people, all people within the enterprise. So that means that I'm going to work with people who are very much aligned with the ways that we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm also going to work with people who are less so. And guess what? Even in that group of people who I think are very aligned with the ways that I engage around sexuality and gender diversity, there's still going to be some differences. There's going to be conflict. And guess what? Conflict kind of gets a bad, what's the word I'm looking for? A bad reputation. We need conflict in order for us to think differently and transform. That said, sometimes those hard conversations are very, very hard. And sometimes you leave those dialogues feeling deflated, feeling concerned, perhaps lacking energy. And so in those moments, it's important, even for folks who are leading this work, to do a lot of good self-care, right? Because as we work to partner with people across identity, across perspective, across belief, it can be exhilarating and rejuvenative, and it also can take kind of a lot out of the work that we do. So self-care is essential. But again, it is part of my commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion to hold space for difficult conversations. And it's a skill that I continue to work on. And it's also a skill that I encourage athenistas to build, because it's just not going to be me doing the difficult conversations. Difficult conversations are happening every moment. There's a difficult conversation about gender and sexuality probably happening as we speak, right? More than likely hundreds of millions right across the globe. And so part of my job is to not only facilitate those conversations, but to also help people build the skills to have those conversations in their immediate areas. I think some of those conversations too is about the why, right? The purpose of doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work with a focus on gender and sexuality diversity. What's the business case, right? What's the return on our investment? And so that return on investment looks like retention. It looks like an expanded employer brand where candidates who are top candidates want to flock to your enterprise because they can feel committed and sure that they're moving into a truly inclusive space. So in terms of how we measure ROI, well, first we have to figure out what are our indicators of success, right? Is it reduced attrition? Is it increased representation? Is it about folks' perceptions of feeling included across identity? So once we start collecting those data and deciding what are our key progress indicators, then you start measuring against those data. And you start sharing those data and talking about and poking at some of those data, and also training up people from across the organization and enterprise to interpret, plan, and move forward. And I was just on a call with a group of athenistas. It was a wonderful call. And we were having a conversation about the work of our employee resource groups. And so part of this and part of the ask was for us to engage some of our, key progress indicator data around retention, attrition, external hiring, internal mobility. Take it back with you, take it to your teams. Take it to teams that are diverse and inclusive, and then start posing questions. Why? How? What do you notice? What does it mean about us and the ways that we work together? And I say it really explicitly when I say, what does it mean about us? Because these data reflect us. They're not just outside of our building. They're about some of the work we've been doing or not. And so given, what we notice about our data, and as we focus on return on investment, what are we doing to move the needle, to shift? Because guess what? Diversity, equity, and inclusion work happens through us. We're the system we're seeking to transform. One of the areas that we're engaging as a group of panelists is, how has D&I transformed in the last decade? And so I am somebody who is situated in America. And so much of my perspective is rooted in that cultural context. And so much of my work is pushing that context, right? I work at a multinational company, as Athena is. We have Athenistas living in the States, in India, and in other parts of the world. And so part of the work is thinking about, well, how is D&I transformed across geo? Because it's different for what that looks like where I'm kind of situated versus what some of my other colleagues, how they're engaging diversity and inclusion across geo where they are. And so what I know is that, kind of back to that initial part of the conversation, I need to learn and grow with our people in order to tailor responses that meet the needs of particular groups across geo. And so that means I have to get to understand laws, customs, all of those pieces, and then get a sense of how D&I is transformed over the years in those spaces. What's new? How are things changing? Well, guess what? We're thinking beyond cisgender identity. That's huge. For a lot of time, diversity meant making sure that cis women were promoted. That was that. And for a lot of time, when we saw some of those numbers improving, we thought, okay, we did it, right? We've achieved diversity. And then we started really listening and understanding to folks' voices that had always been there, right? But we then created more time to actually be inclusive and understand that diversity isn't just about cisgender diversity, right? It's about true gender and sexuality diversity, and that includes all gender identities and expressions. That includes all expressions of sexuality. And now that we have opened up that focus, we're more likely to create more inclusive culture. And guess what? We're just building and growing. The more that we realize how impactful and important it is to work inclusively, the fact that it really impacts our return on investment, the more likely we are to grow and wonder, who else are we not attending to? Which other groups are we not valuing the way that we should be valuing to unleash the power of diversity and inclusion? So I think it's really a philosophical change, that we're open to understanding that we don't know it all, right? There are so many things outside of our purview that we need to work toward. So the other piece too that I wanted to mention, that I do think it's important that we speak pretty openly, externally, and visibly about our company's values in general, and as they relate to diversity and inclusion and gender and sexuality in particular. Because guess what? We need to attract and build the community we seek. And so many people, most people want to work in a place that leverages the power of diversity and inclusion. And so we've got to talk about it so we can be about it. We don't want to miss out on top talent because we're not talking about the ways that we're being open around D&I, right? I also want to mention too that, some organizations engage diversity and inclusion as an add-on or a voluntary piece of work. And I'm so proud to say that athenahealth is really making an investment in our future. We're making a true investment in expanding diversity and inclusion because guess what? The real truth of it is that diversity and inclusion is great for business. It's great for culture, all of those pieces. But guess what? Inclusive culture drives business value. So to invest in this way can yield so many positive returns. And the ways that we can engage some of that is to contribute to and be part of surveys that are making connections between inclusion and return on investment so we can report out. But the data are already there. And so it's really important that we engage around it. So I just invite my colleagues, I invite myself to continue to progress and grow in this area. There's so much that we still do not know. And I encourage myself, right, in my group to just continue asking the questions to learn more so we can truly expand gender and sexuality diversity.
Hi, everybody. My name is Margot Slattery, and I'm the Global Chief Diversity Officer for Sodexo. Sodexo is a global organization working in 67 countries. And for us, India is particularly a very large part of our business. We employ, I think it's probably now around 30,000 people in India, and very proud to say that we've worked in India for many years. So absolutely delighted to join you here today and to be part of this discussion with you. And we're very much thinking of you all at the moment as you go through this COVID crisis. It's on our news and on our media, and I'm especially conscious of all of my LGBTQ+ brothers and sisters in India, and how difficult this must be for you and your families, and particularly for people who have to go back into the closet, go home into family homes, and are not able to be themselves. So we're thinking you especially at this time, and you're very much in our thoughts. So in this session, as a global chief diversity officer, we wanted to think about a number of things, and we have some questions we'd sort of talked about. Fostering, first of all, a culture of belonging for our LGBTQ+ employees in the geographies and the communities and the different legal landscapes is not easy. So how do we drive that? I guess from a Sodexo perspective, we do that very much by having very clear strategy for everything we do in D&I. And that can sound a little cold, but it's very important to have some governance and strategy. And then that governance and strategy affects itself and is found in every country, in every part of the world we're in. We then make sure, even if, for instance, sexual orientation and expression of that sexual orientation isn't legal in an entity, that we still support that country, that entity, and our people on the ground. I'm very delighted in India that has changed, but again, this path to equality takes time, and for many of our community, there's still a journey to go. And we try to make sure that we're aware of what the local challenges are, and that we take that into account. So in India, and that might be for our trans community, our intersex community, we might look at, what are the areas of equality and the intersectionality, and try to talk to those in everything we do. One of the questions, I suppose, that has come up is, have we ever had a difficult conversation with our organization or our board around LGBTQ+? I'm very proud to say that for Sodexo, no, but it did take time for everybody who was actually going to be having the conversation to feel comfortable. So, those of us who were having the conversation, it took us some years, it took us time to feel comfortable, to feel educated, to feel that we could represent our community properly. Our board have always been supportive, because they've always been supportive of inclusion, full stop, and understanding the diversity of our teams, and knowing that when we employ 420,000 people in the world, that we have a responsibility about that. But probably the ongoing conversation is important, and making sure that we're constantly educating people. So an example, on May 17th for 𝘬𝘬𝗿𝘀, we'll have a lot of discussions about what it's like to live a trans life and the lived experience of our trans men and women. We've had discussions recently around intersex, and we've had a number of discussions over the years about being lesbian, being gay, being bisexual. So again, all of those are subjects. We go into the depth of all of those and what's happening. We've also had a number of discussions over the last couple of months around COVID and the impacts on our LGBTQ+ community, and particularly with our teams in India. What has that meant from a point of view of a country where, you know, family is so important and people still live at home with their family? Have people had to step back from their identity, and what have been the challenges? So again, looking at that and looking at, you know, the vastness of your country and how can we make sure that we embrace people in all parts of the country and get that message across. So these have been some of the things that we've been talking about. Has the world transformed is one of the questions. I think the world has transformed so much. I come myself from Ireland, from the Republic of Ireland, which is a long way from beautiful India, where I was about 2 years ago. I spent a lovely couple of weeks in Mumbai with my team, with Shreya and our team there. But one thing I probably noticed when I was there was one thing we really had in common was the fact that we'd come from, in truth, a colonial background, a conservative background. Family was very much an anchor, and change is not easy. But yet I've seen so much change in 20, 30 years in my life, and I've seen it in the world. And when I was in India, I was struck as well by the change that has happened. I think the journey is still a long ways to go, but there is change, and it's big change. But it's not for everybody, and it's as in, you know, the equality has not been fully reached for everybody yet. So I think that journey is ongoing, and we would be naive if we thought that that is finished. That is something that is yet, I think, still to be done. What is important, the company's values around inclusion and visibility, and what are the barriers that companies face? I think some of the barriers will be, you know, does everyone understand why inclusion is so important? Are we inclusive of all of our different dimensions? Do we think about the intersectionality of people's lives? I mean, an example, I'm female, so my gender is one factor. My sexual orientation is that I'm a lesbian. I'm a Christian. That's another intersectionality of my life. I'm white, so there's something around my ethnicity, and you know, again, family and many other things. So we try to think about all of those. What other kind of barriers are there? I think there are people who are perhaps less comfortable talking about our community, and you know, India, just like Ireland and anywhere else in the world, that's going to take time for people to feel comfortable. So that can be a barrier for organizations. Although in my visit 2 years ago, I would have said that I found many companies, and I visited many companies with my team. I found companies were very open and talking about our community and being embracive and supporting. So that was very, very encouraging. Do we need, you know, voluntary roles? Do we need people involved? I think we absolutely do. We need to have resources put into supporting this work. You know, our pride groups need support. They can't just survive on volunteers. We need our organizations to fund that, to put money behind that, and that needs to be ongoing, because just because we have reached marriage equality in some countries doesn't mean that the fight is over or that there's full equality. So I think ongoing spending of resources, spending of time is absolutely vital. Also, that ongoing leadership support is incredibly important. And I know for our teams in Sodexo in India, our country president, our chair of our business, and all of the different businesses that we have in India, and for all of our teams, it's incredibly important that they feel they see these people, that they're visible, and that they are standing up for what they believe in. Also, we're very lucky that a fantastic lady called 𝘍𝘍𝑗𝑗, who is our D&I lead in India, really supports the work we do. So she's also a visible role model. So again, visible role models in country are incredibly important, and keeping that up and keeping the momentum around this. It's also important to look at all our neighboring countries and other parts of the world and how we're supporting that. and how we're supporting those conversations. And of course, business can play a big part in speaking to other organizations who still have some way to go on this journey. So if you're part of a business that has done some of this journey or is moved on, then it's really important that, in India or any other country, that you speak to other organizations who are perhaps less advanced and you help them on their journey as well. And I think that's just something we all have to do. The checklist approach is an interesting one. I challenge myself with this because I think the very nature of being lesbian, being gay, by being bisexual, by being intersex, by being trans, is something we take our time to feel comfortable to come out, to be not covered, to be visible. And if we're doing checklists and counting numbers, then that perhaps is a challenge, because the very nature of what we're trying to do is make people feel psychologically safe. So I have a kind of a challenging relationship with checklists. But on the other hand, as someone who is leading this work in an organization, it's incredibly important that we have some understanding of our numbers. So for instance, Sodexo globally, we have 21 chapters around the world of our global pride. And it's good when I can talk to our comics and tell them exactly how many people are in all those chapters, and when I can ascribe to some of the work and some of the stories of the people. So it really makes it real, and the lived experience is something we can talk to. So as I say, it's a challenge for me. I think being able to talk to the numbers makes for a difference, but I'm challenged in how we might get that. And that, of course, has to be something that people are comfortable with. That might take time. One of the things that we've done is in our voice survey, so in our employee engagement, we've put in questions around people's sexual orientation and their gender, and we've asked them to be frank if they can. And we've been very clear that the reason we do that is that we want them to disclose so that we can help them in their region and put funding into things. So it's for no other reason than that. We don't want to know the numbers for any other reason. So again, I think communication is an important part of all of that, and making sure that people understand why we want to do this. And maybe lastly, I think, in a world of transformation, what does the future hold? And this is maybe the last subject I think, I would like to talk to today. I think for India, you've made great progress over the last number of years. I think the next big area is, as you see families, rainbow families, as you see, people emerge and who have embraced now marriage equality, if that's what they want to do, or perhaps partnerships, or whatever their expression is, the world. But as they perhaps are people who have children and wider family groups, what does that family group look like in your society? How are we embracing? How are we building legislation around that? How are we building safety around that? And how do organizations help and support that? So just like we support families in all of their efforts, in all of our work every day, are we truly looking to support our rainbow families? And are we aware of all of their needs? And is that something workplace is taking into account? So when we think about things like flexible benefits, rewards, the terms and conditions for our employees, is there something more we can do? Is this something we have had a thought about? And again, a topic that we can embrace. So thank you for that. I really have enjoyed being with you today. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I really embrace the spirit of the occasion, and I look forward to coming back to colourful, gorgeous India. And I wish you well through this very difficult period, and know that we're with you and thinking about you, and in pride and in intersectionality and in our family, in our rainbow family, you're very much at the heart of it. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Wow, how amazing this session was. It was a pleasure to learn so much about how our CDOs are working hard to expand the culture of belonging at workplaces around the globe. We could learn how important statistics are, not only to measure where we are, but how much we were able to accomplish in the past years. We could learn how important it is for leaders to ask a lot of questions, expand awareness, and do some research on their own so they can hold space for difficult conversations. We could learn the importance of strategy, of being aware of local challenges, and how constant education is key for understanding the different perspectives. Last but not least, we could learn how important it is to have visible role models to look up to. So, thank you for all the amazing panelists that shared a bit of their experiences with us today.